Well, thanks very much, Chris, and thank you so much to all of you for being willing to get on the call and for what you're doing on a daily basis. I really appreciate that you're on the front lines of responding to this pandemic and doing that at some risk to you and sadly to your family. So thank you very much for what you continue to do every day. Let me also recognize, in addition, you heard Sarah Holmes, my state director, on the line, and you know Chris. I think we also have Ariel Marshall, who is my legislative director in Washington, and Kevin Travellini, who is also in Washington, who works on law enforcement issues. So they are all actually on the phone, so we can follow up with any questions and make sure that the notes that I take are confirmed by other members of the staff so that we can follow up on whatever issues you raise. As you know, we passed legislation back in March called the CARES Act to try and provide assistance to people who need help as the result of this pandemic. And I'm sure you would agree with me that this is like nothing that I've ever experienced in my lifetime. And it has affected so many people in so many very difficult ways. And with people unemployed and with the coronavirus itself, raising concerns and anxiety, I think, in a lot of people, and concern about how it's going to end and how we open back up our economy. It's really led to a time, as I said, an uncertain time that has left so many people unsure of what's going to come next and what they should do to prepare. So one of the things that I'm trying to do as we prepare for another legislative package, something called the HEROES Act that passed the House last week and will be coming to the Senate next week when we're back in Washington, to try and get some sense from you all what you need, what would be most helpful, what we should be thinking about as we're looking at any further legislation. I know there has been some money that's coming for law enforcement directly, the Burn JAG funds, and I understand that anybody applying for those is the deadline is this Friday, so tomorrow. So I'm hopeful that everybody knows that and is on top of the application process. But if we can be helpful with that at all, please let us know. So as I said, I'm really here to listen to what you all have to say and what you're experiencing and to see what we can do to be more helpful. So I'm, again, very much appreciate your being on the call and your willingness to share with me what you're seeing out there and what you think we ought to be thinking about as we reopen this economy and try and continue to respond to the pandemic. So thanks, Chris.
Great. Thank you, Senator. And folks on the line, as I had mentioned previously, what I'll do is I'm just going to go through each of you one by one. And we'll start with Chief Charlie Dennis from Hanover, who's also the president of the New Hampshire Chiefs of Police Association.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for coordinating this phone call. And good afternoon, Senator Shaheen.
Good afternoon, Chief.
And
you were at the start of this whole pandemic in Hanover.
I keep hearing it was the epicenter.
Yes.
Anyway, and I'm sure you heard that on a call last week. I want to begin by just saying thank you for hosting this small law enforcement forum, but also want to say thank you for what you have done and what you continue to do to support New Hampshire law enforcement at the federal level, and let you know that it is greatly appreciated here in New Hampshire.
Thank you.
As you know, COVID-19 has had a significant impact in many ways on New Hampshire law enforcement. I feel like we find ourselves in a guardian mode of attempting to prevent this invisible killer from infecting those we have sworn to serve and protect by using and following guidelines put out in our governor's emergency orders, while at the same time also trying to protect ourselves and our loved ones at home. You know, initially when this started, there was a significant reduction in calls for service when the state of emergency was declared on March 13th, but that is rapidly changing as the weather is warming and people are desiring and in many cases beginning to demand to be out and about wherever and whenever they want. This pandemic has been challenging for us, but the men and women in New Hampshire law enforcement have done an excellent job of adapting to the new normal of the day, and sometimes it seems to change daily. There are a few items that I just wanted to mention. One is personal protective equipment. Certainly that was a significant issue early on, and although it is not at a crisis level now, it certainly could be if things went south. And I want to make sure the wheels are still moving rapidly to solve the shortages related specifically to the N95 masks and ensuring that other PPE is an adequate supply for first responders. And that's some information I got from the state level that they certainly look that N95 masks will continue to be in short supply throughout the summer. One of the other areas I wanted to touch on was data. In law enforcement, that's one of the things we depend on to assist us in making informed decisions. Certainly early on in this process, we were unable to obtain names and addresses of individuals that tested positive for COVID-19. This wasn't an issue specific to just New Hampshire. It was all across the U.S., but was corrected with some hard work of the Attorney General's office here in New Hampshire. There are ongoing concerns with the data coming from the Department of Health and Human Services about the number of positive cases, and those numbers aligning with the data pushed out from our 911 centers to inform first responders of those positive COVID-19 locations. I would imagine...
Chief, can I interrupt you for a minute so that I better understand what you're saying there? You're saying that there are differences that you're seeing from HHS and from the Fusion Center. Is that where the other numbers are coming from?
They're coming through the 911 center, and that's what we worked on, to be able to get first responders the names and addresses of where these positive COVID-19 confirmed cases were at. And I'll just give you an example of Derry. There's information on a map that shows they have 147 cases, yet the information coming from the 911 center has like 30. There's about 117 discrepancies there, and it's hard to get a good picture of what's going on, what's missing, because the data just doesn't seem to mesh together. And I would imagine it's not just New Hampshire. I would imagine, it's happening all across the U.S. where there's just that data is just not accurate, so it doesn't give a good, accurate picture of what we're dealing with. And I'm not sure.
You're absolutely right.
But I'm assuming it's like it's with other public health agencies and other states that there may be similar issues. So that's the only reason I mentioned that to you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Also want to throw out a reminder that although we are in this pandemic, the opioid crisis is still killing more people in New Hampshire than COVID, and that we would like more federal assistance in the way of prosecution and federal law enforcement agents to help assist us in that battle. Our Chiefs Association is working with the Department of Safety on this issue, which was put on hold due to the pandemic, but we're beginning to focus again on that issue next month, working with Commissioner Quinn on that. And lastly, I'd like to just speak with you about the HEROES Act, which I heard that you mentioned, 1800. I realize it's a House bill, over 1,800 pages long, and has a lot of great parts to it. There is a section that deals with criminal justice reform, reducing sentences and releasing people from federal prison, and eliminating cash bail during this crisis. There are some members within the association that have some concerns about that, especially there's additional language in there that say these items will continue past the pandemic. One of the concerns is the language closely mirrors language in New Hampshire's first bail reform bill that was problematic for public safety and what we believe for the safety of our citizens. Cities that have done similar efforts, victimization, those that were released or not held when they should have been. We do support criminal justice reforms that are collaborative, data and research driven, and that does not create public safety issues. That's the issues that I wanted to at least bring forward, Senator. I thank you for your time and listening to New Hampshire law enforcement.
Well, thanks very much. Let me just respond to two issues that you raised. One is on the opioid epidemic, which I agree continues to be a huge challenge and one that we continue to focus on, trying to ensure that we have additional funding. I know that SAMHSA got about $100 million in the CARES Act, and New Hampshire is going to get, I don't think it's arrived yet, but somebody on the call correct me if I'm wrong. So we are going to get some percentage of that, which will be helpful, but we are also trying to make sure that as we start an appropriations process, which is happening separate from the other package of pandemic legislation, that we continue to urge support for treatment, law enforcement, all of the myriad ways in which we are trying to respond to the opioid epidemic. The other thing I just wanted to share, I share your concerns about the section that eliminates bail based on our experience. I suspect that will have trouble getting through the Senate, but who knows? It's not clear yet how this bill is going to be negotiated. But the other thing that I think is really important for all of us is I believe the biggest fight that is going to happen between the Senate and the House and between Democrats and Republicans, sadly, it seems to be more of a partisan battle than I think it should be, is going to be around how much funding goes to the state and local levels. And I have been a big supporter of saying we've got to help states and local communities because you all are the ones on the front lines. And if we don't do that, what, as you all know, because most communities are doing budgets about now, we're going to see people laid off. We're going to see the dollars that have been spent to fight this pandemic are not going to get replaced. And so I'm going to do everything I can to ensure that we get the funding that states and local communities need. But thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I'll now move on to Scott Naismith from Salem PD, who's also the president of the New Hampshire Police Association.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Scott.
How are you, Senator Shaheen?
About like all of us these days, right?
Hanging in there?
Yeah.
Trying to get through this?
Wishing I didn't have to go back to D.C. next week.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Well, I just want you to know that the New Hampshire Police Association appreciates your continued support, especially with the Families First Act, which went a long way to support first responders. That was really great. We'd like to thank you for that. And the Chief touched on a lot of great things. I just wanted to touch on a little about in the beginning of this. You know, the NHPA had a lot of concerns for our officers as far as testing, expedited testing, and testing sites. Those were our major concerns. And Perry Plummer and Fire Marshal Parisi from the EOC were amazing. They did a great job. They answered all of our questions, our concerns. They really did a great job. And last thing is the support of the GOFA committee and the governor for the hazard duty stipend. Obviously, we have some. Prior to this, we had some serious recruiting and retention issues, and I think that stipend will have a lasting effect on those officers, and just to know someone has our back, and we appreciate that for all of you.
Well, thank you. I agree. I think Perry Plummer has done an amazing job and continues to do that, and of course, Paul Parisi as well, and the Emergency Operations Center. We coordinate with them, as Chris will tell you, on a regular basis and share with them what we're hearing. And this has been a very collaborative effort, and I think that's been to everybody's benefit. And I agree. I think the additional stipend has been important. It's something that's in, as you're probably aware, in the HEROES Act that's in the House. I'm hopeful that we can continue that, both for first responders, for police, for firefighters, EMTs, and for some of the other healthcare workers who are on the front lines as well.
Yes, I agree. And just ending, I just want to thank you again for having this call and listening to us and our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Scott, and thank you for your representation of the men and women in law enforcement around the state. Move on to Colonel Noyes from State Police.
Good afternoon, Senator. How are you, ma'am?
Hi, Colonel. I'm good.
Good. Thank you to Chris and Sarah for putting this together. I'll try to keep it brief. I know that the chiefs probably have a little bit more to say than I do. But, the state police has faced some unique challenges with when COVID hit and our lack of PPE at the time. We all had some, but we certainly needed more. It was fortunate for us that the traffic volume went down significantly. The stay-at-home order was in effect, and most people adhered to it, and that lasted a few weeks, which was good, in order to enable our personnel, both sworn and civilian, to get that valuable PPE that the chiefs were talking about. Now as the various sections of our economy are starting to reopen, we're in a good place as a division. As many of the chiefs know, and Chief Dennis knows, we're certainly an ally to anybody that needs anything or any additional resources. In the onset of COVID, we found a number of our personnel being reassigned, whether it be to the EOC based on specific skill sets they had, or assisting with PPE distribution, for example. We were able to assist in those areas. Our primary concern, of course, was ensuring, longevity of our health and our personnel sustainability. And that proved challenging in many areas, especially in our Investigative Services Bureau with our major crime unit. We wanted to make sure that their health and wellness was paramount, and we provided whatever resources we could to them. We've had a number of areas within our division increase output during this time. Our Information and Analysis Center, our state lab, due to the office space that many of our great employees work at in the lab, we've broken it up into a couple different shifts to make sure that the resources are still available to the state. Out of our Record Information Services Bureau, our gun line in the month of April, we saw almost 10,000 requests come in, which was 3,000 over the next highest number of requests ever in our history.
Wow.
Our narcotic, it was, so we essentially had to redistribute our personnel. Many troopers and other civilian staff were called in and got reassigned to handle those requests coming in, to make sure we were able to provide those resources to our constituents during that time. Marine Patrol, preparing for their season to reopen, was a little challenging because, as I mentioned, as the economy is opening up, everybody does want to get outside, and that's one of the areas they feel more safe than anywhere else. So wanted to set them up for success. In our criminal records, with the challenges that we're facing with fingerprinting, which has led to really our reopening plan as a division and as a department within our division within the Department of Safety, as far as what is that going to look like, how can we do it, and the biggest objective for me within the Division of State Police is to make sure that we have sustainability when it comes to PPE, to make sure that we're not going to run short at any given point. I think we do have a really good handle on that, and we're controlling, keeping track of burn rates and what that looks like. So, but that at this point, two primary goals: PPE and the health and wellness of our sworn and civilian staff. So I've taken up enough time, and I appreciate you having this call very much.
Thanks. Can I ask you, Chief Dennis talked about calls increasing as the economy reopens. I assume that you're seeing that with the state police as well.
Yes, ma'am, we are. The calls for service, arrest and motor vehicle contact, as was expected, went down when COVID hit with the stay-at-home order and traffic decreasing, I think, almost 60%. So we did see a significant decrease during that time. But now that the weather's nice, people are venturing out more, sections of the economy are reopening, everything is beginning to increase again.
You've all basically talked about PPE. It continues to be one of my greatest frustrations that we are here, 3 months down the road after the closing at the stay-at-home orders, and we still are not able to get the PPE that people need, and that it's still in too many places. The prices have increased so dramatically, people are making a killing on it. So it's going to continue to be, when we did the last package of legislation. After the CARES Act, we did some interim funding for small businesses and for hospitals and for testing, and PPE was again part of that legislation along with the testing because it continues to be a challenge for everybody.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you for sharing that.
Yes, ma'am, of course. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Colonel, and again, congratulations on your recent appointment. Move on to Chief Sawyer down in Hampton, who I think has had a busy morning.
Just a little bit. I just got in to take the call. Good afternoon, Senator, and thank you again for reaching out to us all. I don't want to belabor this. I think Chief Dennis and the Colonel did a great job summarizing the bigger issues we all have. I think the only thing specifically looking at Hampton, where we just reconfigured the beach area to a walking mall for the summer, which is going to significantly change our operations. Availability to some type of fund to give us what we refer to as force multipliers, different means of patrol, such as access to things like segways and grants for that type of equipment, because it is going to dramatically change the way we patrol down here. And right now we're pointing for that through this summer, but nobody really can tell us how long they expect this to extend to. So just the continuation of funding for those other issues the Colonel and the Chief highlighted, but also for the more specific areas where we're a little town of 15,000 most of the year, and we balloon up to 100,000 anytime it gets above 80 degrees. So we're going to be looking for some specific funding for unique equipment maybe other people really don't have a need for, but just looking for a little assistance with that.
Good. Well, just let us know. I think the closer you stay in touch with us, the more helpful we can be about your specific needs, and that's true for everybody on the call. The more you can tell us what the specifics are, the better we can engage and see how we can be helpful. Can I ask, Chief, what did you see? Memorial Day weekend the weather wasn't so great after Friday, but what did you see at Hampton Beach? Did you see huge crowds, and were you concerned about people not social distancing and feeling like
Friday,
it was an issue?
Friday, yeah, it was an issue. Obviously we have a lot of entertainment and dining and drinking establishments down here. Now, inside the establishments, I'll have to say they did a pretty good job of keeping the tables separated at proper distance. All the staff was properly masked, but outside the establishments, trying to maintain that social distancing in the lines has been difficult at best, and we're also dealing with a number of cases with the Attorney General's office of hotels and motels renting in violation of the governor's orders. So trying to work our way through that has been the challenging part, on top of trying to get the Ocean Boulevard area converted into a walking mall. So it's been a tough couple of weeks.
Hopefully it's going to get easier. And as I said, let us know if there's specific equipment and there are issues in terms of the burn jag or whatever the programs are that we can be helpful with. Please let us know.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Sawyer. We'll move on to Chief Carlo Capano in Manchester.
Good afternoon, Senator. Thanks for taking the call today.
Chief.
How are you?
As I said, I'm fine. You all are probably having a lot more difficulties than I am. I'm just complaining about going back to Washington. You all are dealing with all of the challenges day to day. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for joining me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm not going to go over some of the things, although very good information from the Colonel, the other chiefs, and I couldn't agree with them more on everything that they're talking about. I just want to cover two issues that I'm dealing with here in Manchester, and I truly expect, and I'm not sure how we're going to prepare for this moving forward, but the issues of homelessness in the city and mental health are just really crippling the city of Manchester right now. We have over 134 people that are out in the community homeless right now. This all started from, well, obviously in the summertime, people want to live outside opposed to living inside of shelters. Mm-hmm. But then when COVID hit, we had some positive tests over at our shelter, Fit New Horizons, and it caused probably half of their population over there, of the 138 that were being housed there, to go out onto the streets, which caused some great concern for us. So we were forced into a situation of following CDC guidelines to not break down camps. So we tried to contain them as best as we could, which we have done, and the state has helped out tremendously. I can't say enough about Perry and Bobby Quinn. They've been doing a fantastic job for us. But my biggest concern is, as we move forward, what we're going to do with our homeless population, because we're getting a huge influx from outside of the Manchester area of people coming here for the services. When we're down and in those camps and trying to get them transitioned back to the shelters, we are seeing the mental health issues are just becoming overwhelming. And it's really shining a light on the problem in the state with mental health and with the homelessness. And that's really my biggest hurdle right now in Manchester, is trying to deal with this population that we're starting to see a very bright light shined on.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. I know that it's been a very big issue. There is funding coming for homelessness. I think some of it has been released, and I don't know, Ariel or Kevin, if either of you know whether that funding has been released yet to New Hampshire for the emergency solutions grants and some of the other housing and homelessness programs.
Hi, Senator. This is Ariel. I don't know whether those funds have been dispersed to the states, but we can look into that. But as you mentioned, there are several $1 million coming to the state because that is such a big issue.
Yeah, and as you point out, it does really shine the light on the mental health issues, which have been so much part of the opioid epidemic and the challenges dealing with that. And, you know, I was on a call with a number of school administrators, principals, teachers earlier this week, and one of the things that I heard from them was, I guess it was last week, was the real concern about mental health on children as well, as they're thinking about how kids are getting through this period and going back to school or not going back to school, depending upon what happens there, and having different rules. I think it's an issue that's going to be with us for a very long time, and we've got to figure out a better way to make sure that the healthcare system is responding.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's just a system that seems to be broken when we're talking about the mental health system and with the homeless in the state. I think depending on small nonprofits like Fit New Horizons, just depending on shelters like that, does not fit the needs for what we're seeing here in the state of New Hampshire. And we're just seeing a vast majority of people just flooding to Manchester for the services here. So it's really starting to cripple the city. Everybody's seeing the homeless problem that we have. And quite frankly, there's no end in sight for that. And I really think that the state needs to really get together and work together to figure out what we're going to do about the housing, the very expensive housing, which causes a major problem. The fact that the mental health concerns, some of these people are not capable of caring for themselves, and we need to do something as a whole to try to correct this problem, or it's just going to continue to grow, and then the entire state's going to be in a position where we'll be really behind the eight ball.
Yeah, no, certainly the pandemic has shined a light, as you say, on things that we knew were issues before, and they are so much more acute now.
So that from Manchester, that's what we're really dealing with. Obviously, the PPE gear is something that we work closely with our EOC here, and we're in good shape now. It was a concern at the beginning for sure. Chief Dennis bringing up the release of prisoners, things of that nature with the bail reform. I've been very vocal about that. That has caused some serious concerns here in Manchester, and I'm not shy to point those out when those pop up here and there. So as I stated, I won't repeat what all the other chiefs are saying, but from Manchester perspective, it's the mental health and the homelessness that's really going to be an issue moving forward.
Thank you. I know that there is some housing funding in the HEROES Act. so we will be, and that's something that people are beginning to zero in on, because not only there are so many people now as the result of this pandemic who can no longer afford, because they've lost jobs, they can no longer afford to pay their rent, and they're becoming homeless in greater numbers. So I'm hopeful that we can get something that will provide some help in that package that we hope is going to go through soon.
Very good. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And actually, I'll just follow up real quick on as far as the emergency solutions grants goes. I believe that the city of Manchester has submitted their plans to HUD, and they're just waiting to get the funds dispersed to them at this stage, both Manchester and the state of New Hampshire.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
You're welcome. We'll move on to Sheriff Dubois from Stratford County.
Hey, thank you, Chris, and I'm glad you're doing well, Senator, with the exception of heading back to Washington soon. But I'm also glad you're going back, along with our full delegation, because I think the work that all of you have done with our state leadership has contributed to a lot of our success here in the state of New Hampshire with this issue.
Absolutely. We have a lot of work to do.
Yes. The others have done a real good job laying out the issues, and I think you're smart to pay attention to the highlights from the Manchester chief. It's a big issue in Manchester, but I know the three cities here in Stratford County have that dynamic going on at a smaller severity. The one thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about that no one else has yet is related to funding, which has been, I think, good coming in from the federal government with your help and the rest of the delegation. One thing that we're seeing in Stratford County, though, is there are some conflicts between accessing some of the funding. An example that I'll tell you about is before we can get at some of the state $8 million that has been dedicated to county government, we have to exhaust all efforts in FEMA. And the processes conflict a little bit. In other words, the deadlines for the state funding come up quicker than the FEMA process is over. We've seen that, and the county administrator said that it appears that you personally have helped with that process. In other words, speeding up FEMA. I just ask that as more funding is released in a dynamic like that we stay on top of those conflicting deadlines, because that funding that's coming in is going to be critical. I know at the county level, I'm sure at the municipal level it will also, but at the county level it's critical to keep our county services going.
Well, you have the right people on the call, Sheriff, because Kevin and Chris here and Kevin in Washington do a lot of work with FEMA, and so the more you can keep us informed about what deadlines are coming up and what the concerns are, the better we can advocate. So I hope you'll share with us when you see those conflicts coming so we can try and help intervene.
We will, and as I said, I've been told by my county administrator that you already have help. I just wanted to make sure that we stay on top of that as we move forward.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sheriff. Move on to Colonel Kevin Jordan from New Hampshire Fish and Game.
Good afternoon, Chris, and thanks for inviting me on this call. And Senator Shaheen, it's always great to hear from you, and I'm glad to hear that other than going back to Washington, which I don't envy you, that you're doing fine. I missed you at the memorial, and I'm going to look to see you there next year. I look forward to that every year. So I would agree with a lot of the other speakers. I'm going to keep it kind of brief here too. I think the collaboration has been remarkable between the federal delegation and our state organizations, and I know that's key in the success we've had here in New Hampshire. We wouldn't have had that without that close working relationship. You guys moved mountains in a very short order, and that was it didn't go unnoticed, ma'am. I just want you to know that. So,
well, thank you very much.
Our PPE concerns were exactly the same as others in the beginning. Thankfully, we had some time. It was remarkable that we got that time, but we did have some time to fix that, and I think it has been fixed. We're in pretty good shape now. Our pressures because of this, I think, have been a bit different from anyone else on the call today, and that is the outdoor resurgence that we've seen. It's been unbelievable. Our license sales are up 50%. Just to give you an idea, I think people are hunting and fishing, quite frankly, because they have the time and they don't know what else to do with their kids. So that's good in a way.
Good for fish and game, yeah.
And it's good for the country, I think. There's nothing wrong with families being able to spend a little more time together. I think that's one of the silver linings of this. I think, long term that will help us, I hope. But it has created some extra workloads for us, certainly, with a small field force in regards to search and rescue. That rose dramatically when we put people outside. And that has kind of stabilized now. We did some public service announcements to try and ease people to not take on these epic hikes, but to go out and walk in their neighborhoods. We are still struggling a bit, Senator, and I know you're familiar with this ongoing issue with the National Forest. 47, almost half of our search and rescue business is done on White Mountain National Forest properties. Yeah. We don't get any support from the National Forest, financial support, so that creates a bit of a financial burden on us. They, during this recent health crisis, they began to shut some of their properties down in order to address the spread of this, and they did it working pretty closely with us so that we all kind of were on the same page. But they're about to open up Tuckerman's Ravine, and that's going to happen, or could happen, as soon as next week, the last conversation I had with them, and that is in the middle of winter conditions, and we envision thousands of people going up there to ski, because that's the only game in town if you want to ski. And so that's a concern. So I'm trying to work with them to get them to ease that date, and even 2 weeks longer keeping that closed would be incredibly helpful to the state. So
and have they been responsive to...
They're trying. I'll tell you what happens, Senator, is the state representatives for the White Mountain National Forest are very sympathetic, and we work very well with them. Some of that gets lost at the federal level. And I don't understand that because I'm not in that realm, but it's going to be very key this year that they listen to their own state foresters, that this, they're warning, their own people are warning it could be a problem. We should rethink this, and just putting it off a couple of weeks with this warm weather is going to make tremendous difference, because I know you're familiar with Tuckerman's. There are no ski patrols up there, so these people are going to come down. They're going to go up there and ski, and the injuries are in a good winter, an average winter, are tremendous, and it's going to be a lot worse, I think, when people have been waiting for that to happen. So a couple of weeks stall on that would really help us. So we're working with them, trying to work with them to make that happen. So if you can do anything, or your people can do anything to help us with that, that would be greatly appreciated.
We can certainly weigh in, and we will do that. Tell me again, what day are they supposed to be opening?
So typically they would open it on June. They would turn it back over to the state of New Hampshire on June 1st. We would have jurisdiction up there. And their snow rangers, the White Mountain National Snow Rangers, are telling us that it is like midwinter still up there. So the skiing, they're predicting a huge influx of people going up there to ski. And so they're reaching out to their supervisors along with us, saying we should stall this off a couple of more weeks and keep it closed until mid-June, when some of the snow would go away and people would be into their summertime mode. And I think we could just stall off a problem that we know we're going to have if we open it on June 1st.
Well, we will certainly we'll follow back up and certainly weigh in so we can make sure that we're talking to the right people.
And then the only other concern that we have at the state level is state budgets being cut. We know that's in our future, and I worry anyway, of the consequences of that. I just want to be able to provide the level of service that we're being asked to provide and to be able to pay for that. And I worry at state levels when those cuts start that we know that have to happen. We hope that there's going to be federal support there so we can continue to do business as we do now and provide the services that we do.
Well, thank you. And again, the HEROES Act that came out of the House includes in the fund, it's almost a $700 billion fund for state and local, and it provides flexibility to be able to use those dollars to backfill expenses that have already been made to fight COVID. So hopefully if we can get something, I don't know if we can get that amount of money, but I think we will be able to get help hopefully for state and local governments, and it will be flexible dollars so they can be used to help with some of those budget shortfalls that are really due to COVID.
Sure. Well, you've done an outstanding job so far. Right down to the officer. I'm sure everybody on this call will agree that the officer in the field feels that that people understand the struggles and have done everything within their power at record-breaking speeds to try and help us with all of that. So that has just been incredible to see. So I hope that continues. And I just want to thank you for all of that support.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Colonel. And we've got about 5 more of you to go and a little over 10 minutes left. So we'll move on to Captain Cheatham from Londonderry PD.
All right, so Chris, give me the 2-minute timer, all right? I promise I'll keep it under 2 minutes. So good afternoon, everyone. Senator, thank you very much for inviting me to participate. And I guess I'd like to focus my comments on a post-COVID New Hampshire, if there is ever such a thing. And I concur and agree with everything that all the panelists have said up until this point. As you know, you fought to get millions of dollars back to New Hampshire for the opioid crisis, for mental health, even outside of the homelessness issue. One of my greatest concerns is that we're going to see increased overdoses, deaths resulting from overdoses. I've spoken to John Delaney from the DEA. They've made some significant seizures, I'm told, because of just transportation issues and things like that. But those that supply these drugs to our citizens are going to come up with new ways, and I just hope they're not going to be coming up with even more potent things in an effort to get more people addicted to make up for the losses that they sustained during COVID. So while I'm very proud of how New Hampshire has responded to the pandemic, both local, state, and federal level. One of my concerns is that there won't be enough money to address the social problems that we're going to face even after COVID. As so much, billions and trillions of dollars have been, dedicated just to like COVID and stuff going on right now. So I'll just leave with saying, as we see businesses being opened and hopefully returning to a sense of normalcy, I think we all just need to keep in the back of our minds what's a post-COVID New Hampshire going to look like on the issues that we were facing, before March 1st.
Yeah. Well, thanks. It's an important reminder that we've got to look beyond this pandemic and make sure that we're addressing the challenges that are going to continue, as you point out, after this.
Absolutely. And I'll defer my remaining time to the next panelist. If there was any.
Yes, well, and I will try and not talk so much.
That's fine. Thank you, Captain. I appreciate all that you do. We'll move on to Chief Tim Charbonneau from Lancaster PD.
Good afternoon, Senator and Chris. Thank you very much for inviting this webinar. First, I'd like to comment on Coos County, how well it is faring so far. But major concerns of the committees that have been put together, Emergency Management Director Ben Olson, along with Fire Chief Flynn and Assistant Fire Chief Ted Joubert, and the town administration, were concerned about a long-term plan about what eventually this is going to hit us harder than it has, because it really, knock on wood, hasn't really hurt or hit us very bad in Coos County as yet. So we're still very much concerned of what is, as well as everybody is. And again, the plan for the opening of or the reopening of the state is a concern for us as well. Overall, the communities in Coos County, I think, are faring fairly well. They're adhering to the rules for the most part. There are some that always will step out of bounds a little bit, and we try to reel them back in. We've been in touch with the Attorney General's office for a couple of issues that we've had. But other than that, overall, I think we're in pretty good shape.
That's nice to hear. I hope that continues.
And so do we. But other than that, again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And based on the number of people that I saw in the parking lot at Shaw's going through town and out on the deck at Scorpio's over the weekend when I drove through, good luck moving forward up there in Lancaster.
Businesses that are semi-opening up are doing a fantastic job as well as Shaw's about the social distancing and the monitoring of the closeness that people are not getting at. They're doing a phenomenal job.
That's great.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you for taking the time to jump on. Move on to Sergeant Mullaney at UNH.
Good afternoon, Chris. Good afternoon, Senator.
Afternoon.
First, maybe rather selfishly, I wanted to thank you for your decision to stay and work with us as our senator and decline that vice presidential position. We certainly, this is the example right here of you taking the time and working with law enforcement. You've always been right there in our corner, and we appreciate that.
Well, thank you. It's so nice to mention that.
Not too much different than anybody else has already said. I mean, the PPE issue, I think that supply chain is going to be paramount. I mean, as we look forward to here at the university bringing back, 15,000 students, even if you, easy math, 15,000 students per day needing a mask, those numbers will be staggering in the course of, a very short amount of time. Certainly the number of students that we bring back, I think the majority, come from that Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, places that have been very hard hit, and that's creating quite a concern here locally with some of the townspeople of how that's all going to play out with social distancing for here at the university, and I know you as a local resident here, the loss of Young's Restaurant and a couple of other businesses here
Makes
now
me sad.
locally. So those kind of concerns for us. I guess many of us have now focused on some of the bad side of it. I guess if there is a good side of this. I've been doing this police work for 30 years, and probably some of the cleanest police cars I've ever seen now, with everybody going out with Lysol wipes and wiping everything down morning, noon, and night. So maybe there is a silver lining to some of this. But again, thank you for your time today to hear all these concerns. And like I say, we're really no different here in Durham at the university than what everybody else has said. We appreciate your efforts to bring that money to the first responders, and these concerns for our economy is to keeping businesses open and keeping even the university running. There's a number of programs here from the Spalding Hall that they're talking about capping that, and I believe we've canceled the Whittemore upgrades to the ice surface and stuff. So those have long-ranging
they do
impacts. So, but. And with that, I know Chris is going to cut me off on time, so I'll defer and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant. I appreciate all that you're doing over there. We'll move on to Chief Emily Cobb from New London.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Senator, so much for taking the time to have this conversation today, and including a small department like New London in the mix. I'm honored to be included on this call today with the other law enforcement leaders from around the state. One thing that has made a big difference for our department and has been helpful is the increase in testing availability and the turnaround time for those results. Throughout the pandemic, we've had 4 different members who have had to be quarantined at different times, and we're a 9-officer department. So thankfully they weren't all at the same time. That would have been really challenging, but the testing availability has really been important for ours. The first member that was quarantined was out for over a week, just waiting on a test result from a person that they were exposed to. And then the most recent one was less than 48 hours. So that has been especially helpful for our small department to make do with. The PPE has been incredibly helpful. It's comforting for the members here to know that there is backup for them at the state level in terms of the supply of the PPE. So that's been incredibly important. One thing that we've dealt with here in town as well is the out-of-state folks that are coming in. We have a lot of people who own second homes up here in our community. Yeah. So just trying to educate the public, whether they're from New Hampshire or from a different state coming into our town, has been important for us, trying to enforce the guidelines that the governor has put out as well. So that's been an interesting area for us to deal with. And like Sergeant Mullaney had mentioned,
have people generally been cooperative?
Generally so. I think one important thing is folks here in town think that, everyone should wear a mask and must wear a mask and things like that. So it's important to remember that some of those things are recommendations and not mandates as far as wearing a mask. But generally speaking, yes, people have been quite cooperative and understanding, when it's kind of brought to their attention. We do have a small college here in town, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out if they come back in the fall in a full-time sense or what that looks like. It's important for our community for the college to be in session. It's a small town, and Colby Sawyer College is an incredibly important part of our community, so that'll be important for us. And then just one more thing quickly, Senator, there seems to be so much grant funding and opportunities available that it can be rather overwhelming to know what's available to apply for and how to get it, especially for a person newly in their position like myself. So just in speaking with Chris the other day, he's been helpful and already suggested we stay in touch after this. So that might be an area that would be helpful to help guide through the funding opportunities that are out there, but sometimes it's just a matter of how do I get to it. So,
yeah, thank you for raising that. And what we have tried to do with some folks is to let them know the monies that we understand are supposed to be coming to New Hampshire and the various grant programs. So if we are not getting that to all of you, Ariel and Kevin and Chris, maybe we can try and make sure that we have those relevant programs that we can share with the chiefs and police departments across the state.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Senator, and I appreciate all the hard work you've done so far, and I appreciate everything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And Kevin and I will follow up with everybody on this call afterwards with any grant opportunities that we see, just to make sure that we're hitting all the right buttons. We'll close it up with Chief Matt Canfield from Laconia, and we know that Laconia, like many others on this call, were directly impacted by this crisis at some point in time. So, Chief Canfield.
Thank you, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, Senator. I appreciate you taking the time to hear our concerns and our feedback. I'll keep it really short. I know going last, everybody had some really good information. I would reiterate what Chief Sawyer said about equipment-wise. There is a lot of equipment in needs of the way we patrol and stuff like that, and that would be very helpful, especially with the way Motorcycle Week is changing and it's being moved to August and the impacts of that. Second, I guess the only thing I'd point out is, and it's probably not necessarily direct law enforcement funding, but certainly backfilling of municipal revenue to support city budgets, particularly, my budget. Although we look okay at the moment, certainly revenues are down, whether it be from meals and rooms taxes or, parking revenue and stuff like that. And I imagine that going forward, we're going to see a direct impact on that. And we've made a lot of progress in the state and law enforcement. I'd hate to see that slip because of lack of funding. So anything coming from a federal level would certainly be helpful.
Well, thank you. And I agree. As I said earlier, I think this is going to be one of the areas that there's going to be disagreement on, and I'm going to do everything I can to ensure that funding comes to local communities because, the way I look at it is we're all concerned about opening back up the economy, about keeping people working. And if, on the one hand, we take dollars away from municipalities and they have to lay off people, then that doesn't help us in trying to open up the economy, trying to get people back to work. So I think there's a very important economic argument here. If you're not willing to do it for the right reason, I always feel like the economic argument ought to help convince people. So I think we've got some good information as we look at the projections for what will happen to municipalities if they don't get some help, and what that means for workers, for police, for firefighters, for municipal workers of all kinds. So anything, as you all are talking to your national organizations, anything you can do to encourage them to help weigh in on this issue, I think would be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for taking time out of your busy days. Everybody has a lot going on. You've got a lot of responsibilities, and I appreciate you taking the time to spend an hour here with the Senator. But unless, Senator, you have any other closing remarks, I think we'll end this call whenever you deem appropriate.
Well, thanks, Chris, and I just will echo Chris's comments to thank you all very much for not only being on the call, but for what you're doing day in and day out to protect the health and safety of people in New Hampshire. And as I said, anything we can do to help support your efforts, please let us know. And the more we know, the more you stay in touch with us, the better we can be responsive to what you need. So feel free to, Chris, so you know how to get him, excuse me, Sarah Holmes, and Kevin and Ariel in Washington, you know how to reach all of us. So please do that. Take the opportunity if something comes up that you think we should know. And stay safe, everybody. And well, I hope you and your families get through this and continue to do okay.
Great.
Thank you. Again, thank you all.